Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, hardworking managers and board members. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Now, the driver for reserves always starts with the expenses, how big they are, and when they are expected to occur. That's fundamentally the purpose of reserves, to set aside the right amount of cash so that the cash exists when it's time to get those projects done. So, as you mentioned in the poll earlier, a lot of you have concerns about missing components, estimates for cost and life suggestions, the estimates being online, and then just a lot of concerns for, is it all together? Well, that's a legitimate concern. So we want to help you understand and get a little more confidence with who defines those expenses, what defines those expenses, how are they established, and by what authority. The other part of it is what's typical, and how do you walk that fine line between preparing well, just having enough components that you're capturing all the appropriate upcoming projects without throwing in the entire kitchen sink and making the monthly assessments unreasonably high. I started out in this business because I was the president of my condo association. We didn't have the cash to do the roof project. I know we needed to start planning ahead after we got hit with that big piece of news, and we felt the same pressure you're likely feeling to not go overboard. How much do we plan for without too much? So in the next 30 minutes, I'll show you where the figures come from. I'll walk you through a few typical component lists and leave you with a better understanding of how that component list comes together and how a reserve study prepared according to National Reserve Study standards is going to set your association up for success. This is the outline we're going to follow in today's program, taking you through the issues that will get you familiar with the components appearing in your reserve study. And we start out with what guides the process. So in thinking about this, I want to start you with two images, the three circles on the left and National Reserve Study standards on the right. Those are the basic things going on. And you wonder, what are those circles about? Well, they illustrate that reserve planning is one part of a three-part system. Preventive maintenance is the minor ongoing projects that keep the building in tip-top shape. Reserve planning are the projects that deteriorate over time and need to be renewed, refurbished, replaced. And then there's infrastructure inspections, the things that don't get caught in the reserve inspection, things that take a specialist, an engineer or an architect to identify. Well, once you do the infrastructure inspections, then you know what more or what better preventive maintenance to do. And doing that preventive maintenance then helps your reserve projects last the maximum amount of time. And you can imagine that it becomes kind of a circular process where you do one, it helps the other, and that's what I want to suggest gives you success taking care of your building as it ages. And so those parts come together. Reserve planning is not the be-all, end-all. It has to come in light of preventive maintenance and infrastructure inspections. So let me spend a moment talking about preventive maintenance. Those are the planned maintenance projects that are carried out reactively or proactively at predetermined intervals. We should do this. It's important that we do this. It may be like the roof cleaning, it may be, or the gutter cleaning, it may be shampooing the carpets, sweeping the asphalt, all those things that you do to take care of the project to maximize the appearance and the life expectancy. It also may be some minor projects that you just know have to be done. You don't know exactly where they need to be done, but you send someone out with a paintbrush and you take care of staying on top of the rust to make sure that never gets a good bite on your association. Now, the question is, with these minor projects, are they operating or reserves? And that's where we start to look at National Reserve Study standards, giving us some guidance on that important question. When does a minor operational project become a reserve project? So we have National Reserve Study standards. They were first published in 1998, and one of the foundational issues of National Reserve Study standards was the four-part test that defines what you should fund through reserves. And as you can see here, it's common area maintenance responsibility, a life-limited project with a predictable remaining life, not random, and above a minimum cost. And that's what I want to talk about with respect to operating versus reserves. It needs to be a material cost to your association, and that often means 0.5% to 1% of your total budget, or the manager or board member's signature authority, something that they can say, darn, it's over $500, so I can't just authorize it myself. It's going to take a significant withdrawal of funds. But as you can imagine, that varies from association to association depending on how big they are. We have some associations where the manager has a $20,000 signature authority. We have some associations where that number is $250. So appreciate that you want to handle minor projects with operational miscellaneous funds. Things that would unsettle the budget, you want to start pushing those over towards reserves. And another element is this 4-part test helps you identify those projects where the need and the schedule can be reasonably estimated. So if you can see it coming with a reasonable expectation, and if it's necessary for your common areas to sustain the association, then those are the kind of things you're going to see in reserves. Notice there's no arbitrary 30-year limit here. That is a line that someone drew in the sand a long time ago, and it has nothing to do with National Reserve Study standards. So this is the framework that we're going to look at projects. So often when I do a speaking engagement, people will come up to me afterwards and say, hey, what about this? Someone else will say, well, what about that? Third person will say, well, tell me about this project. Can we fund it through reserves? I'm going to come back to the same thing. We look at potential candidates for inclusion in the reserve study with this 4-part test. So that's how we identify and do arguably a good job of helping to see what projects are planned and what are appropriate to include in the reserve budget, and which are guesses on one hand, too far out, too unknown, too uncertain, or too small. Too trivial, should be handled in the operational budget. So there's a lot of things going on here, but that 4-part test is key. Now, another part of it is understanding that the cost that we identify, you see an asterisk there. The asterisk is because it's supposed to be the current cost. We use inflation in the reserve study, but that's for the funding plan. For identifying the costs involved in the component list, those are all current costs, and they should be all inclusive, which means it includes all related shipping, engineering, design, permit, installation, construction oversight, management oversight, disposal, everything like that. So this is a big project, a rooftop installation, where installation and the engineering is going to be significant, probably permits also. This is a roof project where the disposal, you can see here they've rolled 2 dumpsters. The disposal is a big deal for tearing off a roof and getting prepared to put the new roof on. Now, the C that I haven't shown yet is yet another idea, another concept in National Reserve Study standards. There is no requirement like for like. Picture here shows a couple of rooftop boilers. This property had a big 2 million BTU boiler. It fired on, created a lot of hot water, went to the tank, and then it cycled off, every time drawing a whole lot of natural gas. Now, what they found out is as they aged, that the needs of their association would be better served with 2 high-efficiency 1 million BTU boilers. That way, one boiler could fire off. It would be a net less energy draw, and rarely through the course of the year did they ever need both boilers firing at the same time. Reduce their energy usage, totally more efficiency for the association. Cost-wise, it was better on all the infrastructure within the association. So understand that we don't have a responsibility to replace exactly what's there, and that's appropriate for entry access systems and so many things that are technologically based. All right. Now, another factor is state law and governing documents. What does the law say in your state? And more local, what do your particular governing documents say? Well, the key here is common area. So that's the first thing that we need to figure out. Common area definitions are significant. They define the important line between what the association is responsible to maintain, what the owners are responsible to maintain. I trust many of you, hopefully most of you, have a responsibility matrix saying who's responsible for what. And that helps decide if it's the developer's responsibility, if it's the management company's responsibility, all these kinds of things to find out who's responsible for that thing. And then when it comes to state law, remember, your association is generally going to be compliant with the law when you're following National Reserve Study standards. Those National Reserve Study standards are there for a purpose and a reason. They hold the providers to a high standard, and they give consumers a consistently high quality product. So if you're following National Reserve Study standards, in I think almost every case, you'll be compliant with the law in your state. So what we're trying to do here are find those reserve projects, those reserve expenses that are reasonably predictable, that are the financial responsibility of the association, and that are larger than can be easily absorbed by the operating budget. We don't want anything just lingering out there that is going to unsettle the operating budget, cause you to say, oh, darn it, when that thing hits. We want the big projects to be captured and identified and planned and budgeted for in the reserve study. Okay, so that's what we're looking for and using that national standard 4-part test. And that will provide you with a consistent sweet spot, giving you a component list that identifies all the right projects, the big ones, reasonably predictable, that are going to be unsettling to the association otherwise. Those are the things we're trying to capture and plan for. And we just don't want you being surprised by projects that fundamentally should not be surprising. A roof failing after 20 years in plain sight, that should not be surprising. That is something that you should have 20 years of preparing for. And that's what we want to do with the reserve study. Help you not be surprised by the things that are not surprising. All right, well, let's turn the corner now and spend a few minutes on where the information actually comes from. That's a good question because you're wondering, what happens? How does that appear on my paper? Well, we know from enough questions that we've talked to with people, the questions that we get is that so many of our customers think that we finish the site inspection, we go back to the office, take our shoes off, check some sports scores, check the news, grab a cup of coffee, and then wait till the last 5 minutes until we click a few buttons on some online tools and magically create the reserve study. Well, that's a great fantasy, and we'd be certainly a whole lot more profitable if it was that easy. But the bottom line is, how it really happens is old-fashioned hard work, a lot of researching and networking. So we are connecting the dots, figuring out what was done, where was it done, by whom, when was it done, why was it done, and for what cost. And we're all trying to put that together and find out, okay, what's typical, what's expected for your type of property in your area with your age of this particular type of asset. We're putting together a multi-piece mystery story of what has brought us to this point in time with your property. And so part of that searching for the right information is what we do at trade shows. Typically, we are wandering through the trade show speaking to, as you can see here, plumbing and heating companies talking about the air conditioning units. You can see they've got I'm not sure if you can see it, but a large crane here for the installation they're doing. We talked to them about related costs. We talked to paving companies here on the left about what are current life expectancies with material, what the supply chain issues are doing to costs. Talked to the pool people about pool surface, coping, decking, all this kind of thing. We are constantly gathering information to do a better job serving you. And that also means documenting and tracking what the costs have been among our other clients. Most of the life and cost information in your reserve study from association reserves comes from associations just like yours in your area doing recent projects. They tell us that we just finished our roof project. There was $100,000, and we compare those notes to the size of your roof, the different uniquenesses of your roof. But basically, we're able to apply the lessons we've learned doing hundreds of reserve studies each year in your area. Again, whether that be asphalt, putting in a new pool heater, painting your building, doing an inspection, all those kinds of things, we're gathering that information. So assembling it, figuring out what custom adjustments are appropriate for your association based on potentially poor access, obstacles like a lot of tree coverage adjacent to the buildings, steep slopes adjacent to a body of water, small quantities that might make things more expensive, or huge quantities where you get some economies of scale. Installation issues, was it poor installation last time? What are going to be the complications? Bad weather, like having to do a roof project in a wet part of the year, or the material choices, something that might not be available or appropriate for your association. So what difference is that material choice going to make to you? So it's a fair question to ask your reserve study provider. Where do you get the majority of your life and cost estimates? Most of the reserve study providers I speak to get their cost and life estimates from their particular local body of experience. Some more than others supplement with national cost guides, localized per zip codes, but that's a legitimate question. At Association Reserves, the vast majority of your life and cost estimates are going to come from actual projects recently experienced by other associations in your area. All right. Well, this is my favorite part of the program. It's where I spent, I think, the most time preparing, and it's where I could spend way too much time telling you some stories and showing you the nuances, but I want to spend some time talking about actual component lists and telling you how it might look like at your association based on what you can see from other associations. Now, for the 60-some% of you who've attended some of our prior webinars, you've probably seen this slide before. It's our overview of what a reserve component list looks like. And it's a nice primer. It helps us show how its useful life, remaining useful life replacement cost. It's how we show that reserve components are projects. They're not things. Like for asphalt, you can see it's both the seal and the resurface. They're different projects. And this helps you kind of see the big picture. But what I want to do today is use our UPlanet tool to show you 3 different reserve component lists. It's the online tool that comes free with your completed reserve study from Association Reserves. It allows you to get your fingers in and actually touch and see the reserve study electronically. And let me see if I can get that turned on, and I believe you are seeing it now. So when you go to reservestudy.com and log into what we call our Client Center, this is what you'll see from a point of view of a portfolio manager. All right, and let me pick one to start with. Start simple. Let's talk about the Sample Townhome Association. This is where you'll see the completed reserve study. You have an ability to add more people to the access profile, and then you get to UPlanet itself. And UPlanet is kind of a tab-based application. The component list is first. You get to the control panel where you get to set your starting balance and interest and inflation assumptions, recommendation where you can adjust the reserve funding plan. You can do some custom things, but that's really not what I want to talk about here. But what I want to show you is, and then obviously a lot of things you can print, tables and charts, but this townhome association has a few years of kind of light expenses before they get to big expenses. And this is going to be your profile. This is what you as a board member need to understand. You as a manager need to understand what's the nuances, what's the characteristics of this association. So let's dive right into the components. Now, some of the things I want to show you is that in many, if not most reserve studies, the reserve study provider identifies a lot more components than are funded. In particular, I can show you here, the gray components are those that are inappropriate for reserve funding. We've identified them. We've told you we haven't forgotten about them. We just have decided, and you can look into the notes in the reserve study to find out that concrete walkways, this is an operational maintenance issue. But let's see, some things to point out. Tile decking, 35-year life. That's above 30 years. It's really insignificant. It's a nice, stable component. Other things are 15 years, 30, 25, 20. You can see that metal fence is another arguably long life component. This is a 400 some feet. It should be a pool perimeter. One of the reasons we think of the last 40 years is they are painting it very regularly. So if you care for it, you can get a nice long life on an expensive component. And I want to show you some wisdom here. Setting the painting cycle up to be the same for metal fence work painting and wood fence painting. That's a nice thing to be able to do, so it keeps your costs down when you're able to hire one painter to do 2 things. And as long as I'm here, a couple things to show you. A greenscape. Landscaping refurbish every 15 years. This could be the entry plants. This could be the hedge along the roadway, and then tree trimming. We learn this stuff from speaking to your landscape company or your arborist and finding out what's the appropriate tree care cycle and being able to find a good number that fits into the budget. So it doesn't have to be something that you can buy at a store. It's what's necessary, the projects that are necessary at your association. Okay. And we go on down here and find a few more things. Yes, we call this logical cycling, where we're painting the wood every 5 years. and the building every 10. So every other time you paint the wood trim, you get to paint the building exteriors. And then the roof inspection. This is one of those projects, I believe at this association, the threshold of significance was $1,000. So this being a project expected over $1,000, wanted to pay this from reserve. So this is one check once a year. They pay the roofer to do a significant preventive maintenance walkthrough of the property. And then pool area. This is one of those things, maybe a gray area. Could be on the verge of an operational project, probably especially if they, in a year or two, replace one of the 6 pieces or a couple of the 6 pieces, then all of a sudden this may drop into something that's handled through the operational maintenance budget. Okay, kind of getting the feel of things here. Let's go back and let's pick another one. Let's pick the Sample Condo Association. Same thing here. Reserve study, user accounts, you plan it. And let's take a quick peek. Actually, this one has a somewhat similar profile. A few expenses in the next few years, something big in 10-ish years. And let's see what those are all about. Again, the trivial sidewalk repair thing done operating budget, a large pool deck expense, both the useful life and remaining useful life, more than 30 years. Asphalt coordinated seal and resurface project every 5 years. So 3 cycles from now, we'll catch the resurfacing. More coordinated painting. Actually, here's a partial where we have an expectation that they'll replace about 20% of their perimeter metal fencing about every 10 years. So that's not a do all at once. It's an allowance every 10 years. And more logical cycling. And then here's an infrastructure inspection. Cycled every 9 years. So this must be a California property. California has a 9-year requirement for things like this. You can see it's expensive. $42,500 is the estimated cost. So a big deal for them to be able to anticipate and have a big chunk of cash ready to make this happen. Building interiors, coordinating the interior lights with the flooring, with the carpet on the 5s and 10s and 20s. Balcony deck maintenance, likely something they learned that they need to do after spending the money on that recent infrastructure inspection, doing a better job of the preventive maintenance so that the big projects work well together. And let's see, wood surface repainting every 5 years and doing siding repairs at that same time. So partial siding repairs right before you do the wood painting. Makes perfect sense. You can see that the painting is $30-some thousand and the repairs are going to be $30-some thousand. And another example that we're talking about projects here. My recollection is this was a place with 6 buildings. So we're doing 4 of the buildings on this cycle and the last 2 buildings a year later. So phase 1 and phase 2 of the roofing and phase 1 and phase 2 of the gutters. So you don't have to do the entire thing at once. You can see what's appropriate. And then I just thought of one more thing. Balcony decks. Most associations, balcony decks are limited common areas. You and I go out on our own balcony, balcony 501c, okay? That's our balcony. No one else goes on our balcony. But it is indeed common area, and so the association is responsible for it. So limited common areas appear in the reserve study. I'm going to take another couple minutes to show you a high-rise. Same thing. And let's take a look. And you can see a different blend of expenses through the years. Big cluster around the 15 years point in time. But we talk about components, perimeter planting, so more greenscape every other year. Minor tennis court stuff is done operational budget, but that chain link perimeter fence, 40-year useful life, appears in the reserve study. And let's see what some other interesting things. Coordinating roofing projects. Windows, another preventive maintenance project, annual project. They're doing window repairing and sealing, $30,000. Boy, this board must be glad that the money is set aside so they're not having to shake the or ruin the miscellaneous budget in the operating account for a $30,000 expense. And let's look for a couple more things. Balcony inspection, same kind of thing. Big expense, limited common area. Infrastructure inspection, $82,000. And it's expensive to look after your building and anticipate and find the things. But these kind of inspections save hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a great thing to do. Building interior, lobby upgrades cycled together. Hallways phased out. 5 floors, 5 floors, 5 floors, 6 floors, 6 floors, always slightly separate years. What more? Exercise equipment every other year, cycled with the refurbishing. And we get to mechanical systems, electrical generator, a 50-year life on the generator. Boilers, here's an example of what we call a overlapping cycle. Something needs to be done every 20 years. Overhaul it at the 27-year point, replace it at the 7-year point. So something is happening every 20 years, overall 40-year cycle. So a lot of different kinds of things going on, but all those custom uniquenesses based on what's happening in this association, and you run it through that same 4-part test. Let's get back to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so yes, UPlanet is how I was able to show you that, and that comes free with every Association Reserves Professional Reserve Study. All right, now let's talk for a moment or two about how your component list changes from year to year, why a reserve study is a perishable commodity. It's fundamentally because everything's in a constant state of change. The costs, whether it's inflation, supply chain, or other things, conditions, age, weather, severe weather, usage, whether it's a place with a lot of kids, an active population, or more of a senior citizen, elderly demographic where the usage, frankly, is more gentle. But you have to be very careful. You don't want to have threadbare carpet where someone can trip and fall and very bluntly break a hip. So economic environment, interest inflation, and the reserve balance, which changes from year to year based on what you spent, what you didn't spend, the funding that you did or didn't do, all those kinds of things. And the boards and their priorities change based on whether you may have to deal with some roadway potholes and accelerate that a year or two. And then you hear that your parts are getting hard to get for your elevators. So due to supply chain, you might want to accelerate the modernization of your elevators. And maybe no one is playing tennis at your association right now. So maybe you stall that. And the hallways and lobby, the priorities change. So maybe you push that back, or maybe you even push it forward. But those priorities change. The point I want to make with that is the plans don't always work. Mother Nature and Father Time get a vote. It's not you set the plan and then you get to drive the bus. Father Time says, sorry folks, it's not going to last that long. And you might get hit with a lot of rain that just shows that your roof just isn't cutting it, or a lot of heat that's just baking some of your outside surfaces, some of your paint. So understand that your reserve plan, the components, that is going to have to change just because the factors change. Now, let's talk about how you deal with those changes. You add, you edit, delete components as appropriate. I'm going to assume that most of you have a professional reserve provider that you work with on this project. So you're going to discuss these things. Hey, this is deteriorating a little bit faster, or we are finding some roof leaks here that are new this year, or we're having some plumbing problems. Communicate that to your reserve study provider, and they will help you work through these issues. And it's really going to be helpful to keep a notebook, a folder, online file with reserve project documentation, so you are not wondering and saying, oh gee, what did we spend that $50,000 on? Have that information. That is gold to a reserve study provider so they can understand what the rhythms are of your association, the expense rhythms, the maintenance rhythms, the replacement rhythms. So all those kinds of things will help your reserve study provider correctly identify, adjust, and then add, edit, delete as appropriate. So we get to the summary part of the reserve study. I'll bring this in for a landing. And what I want to say is that everything starts with the projects. Your reserve funding is defined by the expenses. So when are they going to occur? And how big are they? How soon do you have to rush to get ready for an expense, or do you have time? Those kind of projects. And it's not really always in your power. Some associations are fundamentally more expensive to maintain than others. A high-rise may have a lot more mechanical components, a lot of nice pool furniture, but hopefully they have a lot more people. You can see some equipment sticking around the corner here. This may be looking like an efficient townhome association, a metal seam roof, I can tell you, but this is a flat driveway, and it is just getting beat up by the sun and standing water. This property has a lot of wood trim, a lot of roofing per each unit. So there's got to be a lot of expenses. And you compare that to this project that has a flat roof with we'll call it a mansard tile roof that's going to last a long time. Concrete sidewalks, simple vegetation. You're going to have a custom, unique blend at your association, and that just plain needs to be acknowledged. And don't make the mistake of thinking that if you ignore the costs, they're going to go away. Look at this beachfront association. You know that this stairway down to the beach is going to get absolutely beaten up every year by the waves. Look, it's within the high tide zone. So that's wood. That is going to be expensive. This association was pretending they didn't need to paint the beginning of rust and care for and prevent rust. And now this little stairway is red taped off, not usable. These people who live above this stairway have to go to the other end of the building and use the other stairway. These are balcony problems that were identified in the infrastructure inspection. It's a oh darn moment, but boy, that's a lot less expensive to fix something than it is to have a crumbling balcony, especially if it endangers somebody. So expect to regularly update your reserve study, rebalancing the anticipated costs. That's what we're talking about today. When are they going to happen? How big are they going to be? Updating your financial starting point, which is latest reserve balance, and that all gets computed into your reserve funding needs. But the point of this webinar is it all starts on the anticipated costs, and those are changing every year, when and how big they are. We want to set you up for sustainability for your association, meeting the anticipated needs and avoiding turning into what we call an Aspen Creek. Mismanaged, sloppy, disorganized, deteriorating. These are decisions the board made, and it's in your power to make decisions that prevent this. So we want to thank the team at Go Gladly for allowing us to use their cartoon, but we want to help you understand that it's the decisions you make about your components that are the crux. Those are the drivers for your entire reserve plan. Now, there's more we can say. There's more we have as resources at Association Reserves. That's www.reservestudy.com. We have a book that we created for our clients, reserve components, reserve fund strength, funding plans. It'll help explain what I've mentioned today. It's available now on Amazon.com. You can download Chapter 1 for free on our website to get a sample of what it is. I mentioned You Plan It. That's a $399 value that comes free with every professional reserve study. It allows you to tweak and play with those numbers, not just view them. And all calculations are per National Reserve Study standards. You don't have to wonder, did we get all the calculations right? Did we get all the formulas right? And we have deep library of videos on YouTube. This one will go on YouTube. It'll be there in about a week. So check our video content, give them a like, and subscribe to our channel. And I believe that brings me to the end of our prepared content today. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Paige, who will coordinate our Q&A time.